The United States is experiencing what we call an existential democracy crisis. Now, with Republicans and millions of their sycophants either tacitly or explicitly embracing authoritarianism or fascism, Democrats, for the most part, have yet to respond with the urgency required to save America's democracy from the rising neo-fascist tide. Now, the American society, as we know, was founded on white settler colonialism, genocide, and slavery. Now, this unresolved birth defect at the foundation of the American democratic experiment meant that the country was racially exclusionary by design, but which was from the founding well into the 20th century. Now, let's jump to the current present time. American politics is contoured by asymmetrical political polarization, in which Republicans have moved so far to the extremist side that the party's most moderate members are far more extreme than the most conservative Democrats are. Now, this makes substantial compromise and bipartisanship in the interest of the common good and the American people almost impossible. Now, Democrats and the Republicans, so basically Trump sycophants and Trump haters, increasingly do not live in the same neighborhood or community. In all, they largely do not socialize with each other or have other forms of meaningful interpersonal relationships in day-to-day life. Now to the degree that race is a proxy for political values and beliefs, the color line functions as a practical dividing line of what we call partisan identity and voting. Religion is also a societal space that is divided by politics. For example, public opinion research shows that the right wing evangelical Christians, which technically you can't be a Christian and support Trump, so that doesn't work that way. But supposedly, the evangelical Christians have increasingly embraced authoritarian views, conspiracy theories, and other anti-democratic and anti-social values. As the New Faith in America survey by Desert News and Marist College highlights, the basic understanding of the role of religion in the secular democracy has become so polarized that 70% of Republicans believe that religion should influence a person's political values, whereas only 20% of Democrats and 45% of independents share that same view. Now, the Republicans and Democrats also do not consume the same sources of information about news and politics. Um, the the Republicans now inhabit their own self-created media echo chamber, which functions as a type of lie-filled and toxic closed episteme and sealed-off universe. The creation of such an alternate reality is an important attribute of fascism, in which truth itself must be destroyed and replaced with fantasies and fictions in support of their Satanist and his movement. Now, America's struggle for democracy and freedom against authoritarianism is taking place on a whole new biological level as well. Social psychologists and other researchers have shown that the brain structures of the Republicans are different than those of the more democratic progressive thinkers. Now, the former are more what they call fear centered, emphasizing threats and dangers in a negativity bias. They're intolerant of ambiguity, and they're inclined to simple binary solutions. Now, conservative authoritarians are also strongly attracted to more hierarchy and social dominance behavior. Now, a recent research that was done by a guy named Darren Shurkat, he's a professor of sociology at Southern Illinois University, and he demonstrated that America's democracy crisis may be even more intraceable than the above um, the above evidence would suggest. In his recent article, Cognitive Sophistication, Religion, and the Trump Vote, which appeared in the January 2021 edition of Social Science Quarterly, Shirk had examined data dating back to 2018 for the General Social Survey, and he concluded that there are substantial negative differences between the thinking process and the cognition of white Trump voters, as basically shown in the 2016 presidential election, as compared to other voters who basically supported Hillary Clinton or any other candidate, or the people that didn't vote at all during that election. Now, Shurkat observes that Trump support has been linked to religion and level of education, but it wasn't until, but not until now, and not to cognitive sophistication, which was found to have a positive effect on the voting, but a negative effect on choosing Trump. He notes that philosophers and political elites have debated the potential effects of a mass political participation for generations to come. Now, concerned about the unsophisticated masses coming under the sway of a demagogue. Now, in effect, this debate was always about the quality he calls cognitive sophistication, and since citizens who lack it may not be able to understand and access reliable and valid information about political issues, and it may be vulnerable to political propaganda. Now, low levels of cognitive sophistication may lead people to embrace simple cognitive shortcuts, like stereotypes and and the prejudices that were amplified by the Trump campaign. Now, additionally, the simple linguistic style that was presented by Trump may have appealed to voters with with a lower education and cognitive sophistication, beginning with T.W.'s Adorno's classic study of the authoritarian personality. Empirical works have linked low levels of cognitive sophistication with the right-wing orientations. Now, Trump's campaign may also have been more attractable to people with low cognitive sophistication and a preference for low-effort information process because compared to other candidates that Trump's speeches were given at a much lower reading level. And while much of the Trump campaign's rhetoric and orientation may have resonated with the poorly educated and cognitively unsophisticated people, those overlapping groups are less likely to register to vote or turn out in an election year at all. Now, as part of his research, Shurkat evaluated the political he sorry Shurkat evaluated the political decision making and connection and the cognition of Trump voters, or Trump sycophants as I like to call them. He used a 10-point vocabulary exam and a guest essay at the website Down with Tyranny. He explains what this vocabulary test revealed about white Trump voters. Overall, the model predicts that almost 73% of respondents who missed all 10 questions would vote for Trump. And remember this: that is controlling for education and the other factors. While 51% who were on average who were average on the exam are expected to vote for Trump, only 35% of people who had a perfect score on the exam were predicted to be Trump sycophants. Now, notably, this very strong, significant effect of verbal ability can be identified with educational groups. Now, while the non-college white people certainly turned out more heavily for Trump, the smart ones did not. Only 38% of those with perfect scores are expected to go for Trump, and only 46% of the non-college graduates who scored a standard of deviation above the mean. The same is true for college graduates. Low cognition. The people who scored low on the cognition, college graduates were more likely to vote for Trump. Now, what is really fucking depressing isn't just the polls of the vocabulary exam, it's the average. The mean and the median of the scale is 6, so half of white Americans missed 4 of the easy vocabulary questions. Now, Shurkat's research also explored how religion impacted support for Donald Trump among the sycophants that voted for him. Now, like I said before, you cannot support religion and support Trump at the same time. It doesn't work that way. So basically, this study confirms that white Americans with fundamentalist views of the Bible and those who embrace identifications with sectarian Protestant dominations tended to vote for Trump in the 2016 election. Now belief that the Bible is the literal word of an imaginary invisible being that lives in the sky also impacted Trump voting. Now, viewing the Bible as a book of fables is also significantly predictive of voting choice, with secular beliefs reducing the odds of a Trump vote by 80% when compared to literalists, and reducing the odds of a Trump vote by 52% when compared to respondents who view the Bible as inspired by an invisible imaginary being in the sky. Now, in an email to Salon, Shurkat offered additional context and implication on the relationship between white Christianity, American neo-fascism, and cognition. The problem of the contemporary American fascist right is rooted in education and information, and this problem is not simply about attainment of some quantity of education, but the quality and content of education. Now this leads generations of white Christian Americans to process information about a wide range of issues that we're facing. Now, the segregation academies that proliferated in the mid 1960s and have accelerated well into the 1970s have taught millions of Americans a radically skewed version of America and world history and encouraged a continued segregated society. The homeschooling movement augmented this division and further denigrated the value of knowledge. White fundamentalist Christians have always segmented their communities from the rest of America, and even they exert considerable control over public educational institutions, particularly in the rural areas and in the states which embraced slavery. Now, the white fundamentalist Christians distrust the mainstream social institutions like education and print media, and they actively seek to eliminate public education and to provide alternative sources of information. Now, as a result, people who identify with and participate in white Christian denominations and who subscribe to fundamentalist beliefs have substantial intellectual deficits that make them easy marks for a wide variety of schemes, from financial fraud to conspiracy theories. If you can't read the New York Times, you're going to believe whatever you hear on talk radio or on television, and it's simply impossible for people with limited vocabularies and low levels of cognitive functioning to make sense of the complex realities of the political world. And we now have a population where for 55 years substantial fractions of white people have gone to private fundamentalist Christian schools that leave them both indoctrinated in Christian nationalism and ill prepared to process any additional information. And worse, we now have over 1 million children in a given year who are homeschooled by their parents who are uneducated white fundamentalists, and that total has been pretty consistent for 3 decades since the homeschooling movement blossomed. And what does this mean for the present and future of American democracy in this time of crisis? And Cat goes on and cited the disturbing influence of anti-intellectualism on the American public life, which lends the performative power to ignorant elites. Spouting off obvious lies is no longer a mark of shame, because even basic historical and contemporary truths are not being recognized. We seem to have a stable set of about 30% of Americans, which 35% of them being also white, who are they're oblivious to political realities and incapable and unwilling to come to terms with any of our key social issues. The increasing control over public education by right-wing fanatics is entrenching ignorance and intellectual laziness in future generations. It does not do well to bode well for the future of American democracy. Now, Donald Trump and his movement did not create all these American authoritarians and aspiring fascists, but technically they did. But such people have long been a feature of the American society. What Trump and the Republican fascists and their movement have accomplished in recent years is basically they've tried to empower and normalize a dangerous set of antisocial, anti-human, retrograde, and anti-democratic values and beliefs. Now, saving America's democracy will require a moral and political reckoning and acts of critical self-reflection on a nationwide scale about the American people's character and values, and about how their leaders and governing institutions have failed us and them. Now, changes in laws and institutions are necessary, but on their own, such interventions will not stop the spread of fascism. A lasting remedy will demand that the country's political, cultural, and educational institutions be renewed, re-energized, and reimagined. The questions that Americans must ask themselves are simple yet enormous. And who the fuck are we? And what the fuck are we becoming? How can we fucking unite in a defense of democracy and the common good and the general warfare? And without the fucking answer to these questions, there will be no fucking democratic renewal in the 21st century, and then the fucking fascists win, and we don't want that. So if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King. You can also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out. And if you want to support my work even further, you can donate to my Patreon link, which you can find in the About section of my YouTube channel. And you can donate as little as a few bucks for the month. And hope you guys enjoyed.